Asked to fund my parents' hotel dream with my only asset. They couldn't answer a single business question, but called me selfish when I declined to risk everything they wouldn't risk themselves. I've been lurking on this sub for months, reading stories about family members treating each other's assets like community property. I never thought I'd be posting one of my own. But here I am, at 27, watching my parents look at my apartment the way a hungry person looks at a buffet. This is going to be long. I need to get it all out. The background. I'm 27M. 2 years ago, I bought my first apartment. It cost me $144,000. Every penny I'd saved since I started working at 22, plus a mortgage I'll be paying off for the next 20 years. It's not fancy. 1 bedroom, small kitchen, decent bathroom. Nothing that would make it onto a real estate Instagram page. But the location. The location is everything. My apartment sits in the city center, walking distance to 3 major tourist attractions, 2 subway stations, and the kind of restaurant row that fills up every weekend with visitors from all over. When I was apartment hunting, I chose this spot deliberately. It's convenient for my work in finance. It's close to the nightlife I enjoy. And I knew, even then, that the location would hold its value even if everything else went sideways. I remember walking through the empty rooms before I signed the papers, imagining the life I'd build there. I thought about hosting friends, about dating someone who might eventually share that space, about the pride of ownership after years of renting cramped studios with roommates who left dishes in the sink for weeks. What I didn't imagine was my parents standing in that same space, measuring walls and calculating guest capacity. My parents' situation. My father is 58. My mother is 57. They've both worked corporate jobs their entire adult lives, dad in logistics, mom in accounting. Decent salaries, nothing spectacular. The kind of income that let them buy a house in the suburbs, raise me without major financial stress, and take 1 vacation a year to somewhere warm. Now they're looking at retirement, and I can see the fear in their eyes. Their savings are modest. Their house is paid off, that's the good news. But they've watched friends retire and slowly diminish, spending their days watching television and counting the days until something happens. They don't want that life. They want to build something. They want to feel entrepreneurial before it's too late. They want to leave a legacy. I understand that anxiety. I really do. Watching your parents confront mortality and irrelevance is painful. I love them. They were good parents in most ways, present, supportive, proud of my achievements. They didn't abuse me or neglect me. This isn't a story about monster parents. This is a story about good people with bad judgment and an unfortunate sense of entitlement to their child's assets. The business dream evolution. The dream has evolved over the years. I've watched it morph through family dinners like a slow-motion montage of entrepreneurial midlife crises. First, it was a cafe. "Your father makes the best coffee," my mother would say. People would pay for that experience. They never got past imagining the exposed brick interior. Then it was a small shop. Artisanal something. They never quite figured out what. "The market for handmade goods is exploding," my father explained, citing no particular source. Then it was a consulting firm. "We have 60 combined years of corporate experience," my mother reasoned. Companies would pay for that wisdom. They drafted a business card and got no further. Now it's hospitality. A mini hotel. A hostel. An Airbnb empire. This dream has been brewing for months, fueled by a dangerous combination of YouTube videos about passive income and success stories about ordinary people who turned spare bedrooms into gold mines. They've watched documentaries about boutique hotels and absorbed Instagram content from travel influencers. They've convinced themselves that hospitality is the path to wealth, purpose, and legacy. They just need one thing, a perfectly located property. Guess whose property fits the description? The revelation. It happened at a family dinner 3 months ago. I'd driven out to their suburban house expecting the usual. My mother's roast chicken, my father's complaints about local politics, questions about my dating life, and maybe some gentle pressure about grandchildren. Instead, I walked into an ambush. The dining room table was cleared except for a laptop, a printed spreadsheet, and what appeared to be a handwritten business plan on notebook paper. My father was wearing the blazer he reserves for important occasions. My mother had that nervous energy she gets when she's about to ask for something she knows she shouldn't. "Sit down," my father said, gesturing to the chair across from them. "We have a proposal for you." I sat. The roast chicken cooled on the kitchen counter, forgotten. "We've been researching the hospitality market," my father began, leaning forward with the intensity of a man delivering a TED Talk. "Short-term rentals. Boutique accommodations. The tourism sector in your city is growing by 18% annually." I didn't ask where he got that number. I was too busy watching my mother nod along like she'd helped compile the research. Your apartment, my father continued. Its location is prime. Tourists would pay premium rates for walking distance to the attractions. We want to turn it into a mini-hotel. I waited for the punchline. It didn't come. Here's what we're proposing, he said, sliding the notebook across the table. You transfer the apartment to us. We handle the renovation, the management, the marketing, everything. You become our partner. When the business succeeds, we'll buy you a bigger, better apartment. This is a family opportunity. I looked at the handwritten plan. It included phrases like synergize family assets and leverage generational wealth. There were no numbers, no projections, no timeline, just buzzwords and enthusiasm. What does partner mean, specifically? I asked. My father beamed, clearly pleased I was engaging with the concept. You provide the apartment. We provide the work, renovations, management, marketing, customer service. We split profits 50-50 after expenses. Eventually, the business grows, we buy more properties, and you benefit from everything we build together. My mother leaned in. You're young, single. You don't need that much space. You could stay with us during the renovation phase. 6 months, maybe a year. Then you'll have income from the business and eventually a better apartment. Everyone wins. The math problems. I sat there doing math in my head while they watched me expectantly. My apartment, $144,000 in equity. Their contribution, labor, ideas, YouTube knowledge. That's not an equal partnership. That's me funding their dream while they do the work and control the asset. And 50-50 split after expenses. Who determines what counts as an expense? Who tracks them? Who prevents creative accounting that shows no profit year after year while they live off operating costs? What's your business plan? I asked. We just showed you, my father said, gesturing at the notebook. No, I mean a real business plan. Projected revenue. Operating costs. Marketing strategy. Occupancy rate estimates. Seasonal fluctuation analysis. Competition assessment. Silence. We're still working out the details, my father said carefully. The plan comes after we have the property secured. So you want me to give you a $144,000 asset so you can then figure out if this business is even viable? You're not giving us anything. You're investing in a family business. You're becoming a partner. With no legal structure, no written agreement, no defined equity stakes, and no clarity on what happens if it fails. My mother's face tightened. You don't trust your own parents? We're not going to scam you. The practical questions. I pushed forward. What's the renovation budget? My father waved his hand. Maybe $20,000–$30,000 to make it hotel quality. New furniture, fresh paint, some fixtures. I knew better. I'd looked into renovating my bathroom last year and gotten quotes that made me postpone the project indefinitely. City center contractors charge city center prices. A full apartment renovation to commercial hospitality standards? $50,000 minimum, likely more. Where's that money coming from? We'll take a loan against the property once it's transferred. I let that sink in. They wanted to transfer my apartment into their names, then use MY property as collateral to borrow money for their business experiment. If the business failed, the debt would still exist, secured by the apartment I no longer owned. What about regulations? I asked. Short-term rental laws. Zoning. Hotel taxes. Safety inspections. My father nodded like he'd considered this. Bureaucratic hurdles. We'll figure it out. Have you researched what those hurdles actually are? We'll figure it out, he repeated. The regulatory reality. I had researched it. 2 years ago, when Airbnb first crossed my mind as a way to earn extra income, I'd spent a weekend learning everything I could about short-term rental regulations in my city. They were strict. Operating required permits that took months to obtain. Zoning restrictions limited which buildings could host commercial hospitality. Hotel taxes added 15% to gross revenue. Safety inspections required fire suppression systems and emergency egress routes. Neighbor notification requirements gave surrounding residents the right to object. And perhaps most importantly, my apartment building had HOA rules explicitly prohibiting short-term rentals. I'd read the bylaws before I bought. The prohibition was clear, enforceable, and had been upheld by the courts when a previous owner had tried to challenge it. When I explained this to my parents, my father's response was, "Those are just rules. Rules can be changed." We'll talk to the HOA board. The HOA board consists of retirees who moved into this building specifically because it prohibited transient guests, I said. They're not changing that rule. Then we'll find a workaround. What workaround? We'll figure it out. Update 1. The Confrontation. The dinner ended badly. I drove home replaying the conversation, trying to understand how my parents, two rational, educated people, had convinced themselves this plan made sense. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept running the numbers in my head. My apartment, $144,000. Their sweat equity contribution, impossible to quantify, but let's be generous and say $50,000 worth of labor over a year. That's still me contributing nearly 3 times what they would. And at the end of that year, they'd own my property. I'd own expectations, promises, verbal commitments from family members that could evaporate the moment something went wrong. I thought about my father's logistics career. 30 years of moving products from point A to point B. Valuable skills. Transferable skills, maybe. But hospitality isn't logistics. You're not managing inventory, you're managing experiences. You're dealing with humans at their most demanding. Tired travelers, honeymoon couples expecting perfection, business travelers who need everything yesterday. The emotional labor alone would break most people who hadn't been trained for it. And my mother's accounting background? Sure, she could track expenses. But could she project revenue for a business that didn't exist yet? Could she model the financial impact of a bad TripAdvisor review? Could she calculate how many bookings they'd need to cover a loan payment they hadn't even applied for yet? A week later, I went back. I'd prepared. I brought printed information about short-term rental regulations. I brought articles about hospitality business failure rates. 60% of new restaurants and hotels fail within the first year. I wanted them to see that number in writing. I brought a spreadsheet showing realistic startup costs versus their estimates, complete with quotes I'd gathered from contractors for comparison. I need you to understand why I can't do this, I said. My mother looked at the papers like they were poison. You've been researching ways to say no. I've been researching whether this plan is viable. It isn't. I walked them through everything. The regulatory barriers. The HOA prohibition. The unrealistic renovation estimates. The absence of any hospitality experience. The risk distribution that put everything on me while they contributed nothing but enthusiasm. You're asking me to give you a $144,000 asset so you can experiment with a business you've never done, in an industry you don't understand, possibly in violation of building regulations, I said. The partnership has me contributing property while you contribute plans. If it fails, I lose my apartment. If it succeeds, you still control the property you're asking me to transfer. This isn't a partnership. This is me funding your retirement dream with my security. My father's face reddened. You're treating us like strangers. We're your parents. We changed your diapers. We paid for your education. We supported you for 25 years. And you can't trust us with a business opportunity. I trust you as parents. I don't trust you as business partners, because you've never run a business. I don't trust a plan with no numbers, no experience, and no legal clarity. My mother started crying. We've worked our whole lives and have nothing to show for it. This is our chance to build something. Don't you want your parents to be happy? To be successful? To leave you a legacy instead of just fading away? Update 2. The guilt examination. I drove home with my mother's tears replaying in my mind. Did I owe my parents my apartment? They raised me. That's true. They paid for part of my education. Also true, though I had loans too that took me 5 years to pay off after graduation. They were good parents in most ways. They showed up to my school events. They helped me move into my first apartment. They celebrated my successes and consoled my failures. I remember being 7 years old and my father teaching me to ride a bike in our suburban driveway. Patient. Encouraging. Running alongside me until I found my balance. I remember my mother staying up late to help me with a history project about the Civil War, cutting out pictures from magazines we'd bought specifically for the assignment. These weren't transactional moments. They were love. But does love create debt? Does changing a child's diapers for 2 years create a lien against that child's future property? Do school event attendances accumulate into a balance sheet that can be cashed out decades later? I think about it this way. Parenthood is a choice. Having children means choosing to support those children, feed them, house them, educate them. That's what parenting is. It's not a loan to be repaid with interest. It's not an investment that yields dividends when the child grows up and acquires assets. You don't raise children to get something back. You raise children because you love them and want them to thrive. But good parenting doesn't create property claims. Parents support children because that's what parenting is, not as a loan to be repaid with real estate. The expectation that children should fund their parents' dreams with their own hard-earned assets isn't love, it's entitlement dressed in family obligation. I felt guilty, though. Of course I did. I love my parents. I want them to be happy. Watching them confront retirement anxiety is painful. Part of me wanted to just say yes, to give them what they wanted, to be the good son who sacrifices for family. But another part of me, the part that had worked 60-hour weeks for years to save that down payment, knew that saying yes would mean losing everything I'd built. And for what? A fantasy business run by amateurs who couldn't answer basic questions about their own plan. Update 3, the alternative and the rejection. I called my parents and offered an alternative. If you want to start a hospitality business, start smaller, I said. Rent a property instead of buying. Test the market. Learn the industry. Take a course in hotel management. I'll help you research options. I'll even invest a few $1,000s as actual investment with proper legal structure, equity stake, written agreement, defined terms. But I'm not transferring my apartment so you can learn whether you like running a hotel. My mother's response was immediate. Renting doesn't build equity. Small investments don't create real businesses. We need to own to succeed. You need ownership to succeed, you mean? Your house is paid off. You could take a home equity loan and fund this yourself. Dead silence on the line. Our house is our retirement security, my father said finally. We can't risk that. I let his words hang there. So your house is untouchable retirement security, but my apartment is available for business experiments? You want me to risk what you won't risk yourself. More silence. That's different, my mother said weakly. You're young. You can recover. We're too old to start over if something goes wrong. And I'm young enough that losing my $144,000 apartment to a failed business wouldn't matter? That I could just start over? Like the years I spent saving for that down payment don't count. They didn't have an answer. They'd never thought about it from my perspective. Their security was sacred. Mine was negotiable. That was the unspoken assumption underlying the entire partnership. Update 4. The Family Campaign. My parents didn't accept my rejection. Instead, they launched a campaign. Over the following weeks, I realized they had been telling their version of the story to everyone who would listen. In their narrative, I was a selfish son hoarding an asset that could benefit the whole family. They conveniently omitted the lack of business plan, the HOA restrictions, the request that I take all the financial risk while they contributed nothing but labor and enthusiasm. First came the uncle. He called on a Sunday morning, his voice carrying the false casualness of someone with an agenda. Your father tells me there's been some disagreement about a family business opportunity. There's been disagreement about them wanting me to give them my apartment, yes. That's not how they described it. He chuckled. They said you were hesitant about a partnership. Look, I know your parents. They're not trying to take advantage of you. They just want to build something meaningful before they retire. Can't you help them achieve their dream? I offered to help. I offered to invest actual money with a legal structure. They only want the apartment. Well, the apartment makes the most sense, doesn't it? The location is perfect. My location is perfect. For my life. For my work. For my future. There was a long pause. I could hear my uncle breathing on the other end of the line, probably trying to decide whether to push harder or retreat. He chose retreat, but with a parting shot. You know, family is all we have in the end. Apartments come and go. You might regret prioritizing property over relationships. The conversation ended awkwardly. I wanted to call him back and ask how much of his property he'd given to his parents for their retirement dreams. But I already knew the answer. None. Because when it came to other people's families, sacrifice was noble. When it came to their own assets, suddenly practical considerations took priority. Then came my grandmother. 82 years old, sharp as ever, with a lifetime of opinions about how family should operate. Family property should serve family needs, she told me when I visited. When I was young, we didn't have this selfishness. We pooled resources. We helped each other. What's yours was the family's, and what was the family's was yours. Did you ever give your apartment to your parents for their business ideas? I asked. She paused. That's different. Things were different then. They always are. The narrative spread through my extended family. I was blocking my parents' happiness by hoarding my apartment. Nobody mentioned that the apartment was mine, that I'd earned it, that the business plan was fantasy. Just, selfish son won't help parents. I recognized a pattern I'd seen throughout my life. My parents had always been risk-averse with their own assets but creative about using others. They'd never invested their own savings in business ideas. Never taken loans against their house for ventures. Always found reasons their own assets couldn't be risked. But my apartment, suddenly risk was acceptable, because it wasn't their risk. Update 5. 1 year later, the dream died when I stopped funding it. It's been a year since that first dinner ambush. I'm writing this final update for my apartment, the one I still own, the one I never transferred. My parents never started the business. Without my apartment as free equity, the dream evaporated. For a few months, they talked about alternatives. Maybe we could rent a commercial space. Maybe we could find investors. Maybe we could start with a single room in our own house. Every alternative lasted about 2 weeks before some obstacle killed it. Renting a commercial space required a lease commitment and startup capital they weren't willing to risk. Finding investors meant presenting a real business plan to people who would ask hard questions, questions they still couldn't answer. The single-room idea fell apart when they realized they'd have strangers walking through their suburban house at all hours. I watched from a distance as each alternative rose and fell. There was a pattern: initial enthusiasm, some light research, discovery of obstacles, abandonment. They never pushed through a single hard part. They never sat down with a financial advisor or a real estate attorney or a hospitality consultant. They watched more YouTube videos and read more success stories but never did the actual work of starting an actual business. By month 4, the dinner conversations had shifted from "when we start the business" to "when we started looking into the business," past tense, like it had already become a memory rather than a plan. By month 6, they'd moved on to complaining about the economy, the housing market, the challenges facing people their age. The business was mentioned only occasionally, with wistful regret, like a vacation they'd always planned but never took. They never executed any of it. No rented space. No investors approached. No room prepared. The dream required my apartment or it didn't exist. Because my apartment would have made it free. Free risk, free equity, free experimentation. Without that, the work was too real. The regulatory hurdles were too complex. The financial requirements were too steep. The learning curve was too steep for people who expected to start at the top. They didn't want to build a business. They wanted to own a business. There's a difference. Building requires sacrifice, risk, sweat, failure, learning. Owning requires someone else to take those risks while you reap the benefits. They wanted the fantasy of entrepreneurship, the title, the pride, the theoretical wealth, without the reality. I watched the small boutique hotel that operates across the street from my apartment. It opened 3 years ago, run by a family who actually knew what they were doing. They have proper permits, professional management, a website that works, staff uniforms, 24-hour desk coverage. They built it from scratch, learned from mistakes, invested their own money, and succeeded. My parents watched YouTube videos and expected the same results by taking my apartment. The reflection. Our relationship is functional but changed. We have dinner monthly instead of weekly. Conversation is surface level. Weather, sports, television shows. The easy affection of my childhood has been replaced by careful distance. My parents still look at my apartment with hungry eyes. Last month, my mother mentioned that property values in your area have really increased. My father noted that the tourism industry is recovering nicely after the pandemic. They're still calculating. Still dreaming. Still seeing my home as their opportunity. I deflect now. I change the subject. I don't engage with their hints. The boundary stays firm. Sometimes I wonder if I was wrong. If I should have just trusted them. If the business might have succeeded with enough luck and determination. Then I remember, they couldn't answer basic questions about their own plan. They hadn't researched regulations. They wanted my risk without their own. They'd never run a hotel or managed guests or dealt with 1,000 daily crises of hospitality work. Their house was untouchable while my apartment was negotiable. I know what would have happened if I'd agreed. Apartment transferred. Renovation started with borrowed money against my property. Regulations blocking legal operation. No permits, no zoning approval, HOA fines accumulating. Business failing because running a hotel is actually hard work. Debt mounting. Apartment seized by creditors. Me left with nothing at 30 years old, starting over from zero. And my parents? They'd still be in their protected house. expressing sadness that it didn't work out, finding reasons why the failure wasn't their fault, maybe planning their next dream with their next target, someone else's assets to fund, someone else's security to risk. That's not pessimism. That's pattern recognition. The final count. What I kept. My apartment. My security. My future. What I lost. Some closeness with my parents. The illusion that they saw me as an independent adult rather than a resource to be utilized. A certain innocence about family dynamics. What I learned. Some dreams are just fantasies waiting for someone else to fund them. The people who want you to take risks won't take those same risks themselves. Family partnership sometimes means your assets, their control. Love doesn't require financial suicide. You can want good things for people without sacrificing everything you've built for their unexamined dreams. They called it a family partnership. I contribute a $144,000 apartment. They contribute enthusiasm and YouTube research. If it fails, I lose my home. If it succeeds, they control the property. That's not partnership. That's me being the investor, collateral, and fall guy all at once. Father said their house was untouchable retirement security. But my apartment was available for business experiments. Their security is sacred. Mine is negotiable. That double standard told me everything I needed to know about this partnership. They'd never run a hotel. Never managed guests. Never dealt with hospitality regulations. But they'd watched YouTube videos and believed they understood the industry. I was supposed to bet my apartment on their tutorial education. The building has HOA rules against short-term rentals. I checked years ago. When I mentioned this, they said, "We'll figure it out." Figure it out how? By breaking rules? By getting fined? By losing the property to legal issues? Figure it out isn't a business plan. Mom said, "Don't you want your parents to be happy?" I do. But their happiness can't be funded by my homelessness. I can want good things for them without sacrificing everything I've built. Love doesn't require financial suicide. They rejected every alternative. Rent first, start small, test the market. Only my apartment would do. Because alternatives required their risk, their money, their assets. This was only exciting if the risk was mine. A year later, they never started the business. No rented space. No small test. Nothing. Without my apartment as free equity, the dream evaporated. They didn't want to build a business. They wanted to own a business, gifted to them, without the building part. My parents wanted to turn my apartment into a family business. They'd contribute ideas and YouTube knowledge. I'd contribute a $144,000 property. They called it partnership. I called it what it was, them dreaming, me paying. Their house was untouchable, retirement security. My apartment was available, family opportunity. Same family, different rules for whose assets are sacred. I said no. They said I was selfish, unsupportive, blocking their happiness. A year later, they haven't started any business. No rented space. No small test. Nothing. The dream required my apartment or it didn't exist. Because my apartment would have made it free. Free risk, free equity, free experimentation. Without that, the work was too real. The dream evaporated when I stopped offering to fund it. I kept my apartment. Kept my security. Lost some closeness with parents who still sometimes look at my location with hungry eyes. But I know what would have happened. Transferred property, amateur business, regulatory problems, debt, failure, loss. They'd still have their protected house. I'd have nothing. That's not pessimism. That's pattern recognition. Some dreams are just fantasies waiting for someone else to fund them. I declined to be the funding. The fantasy died. My apartment survived. That's not selfishness. That's survival. TLDR, parents wanted to partner on a mini hotel business. Their contribution, ideas. My contribution, my $144,000 apartment. Their house was untouchable retirement security, while my apartment was family opportunity. I said no. Extended family called me selfish. A year later, they never started any business. The dream required my free assets or it didn't exist. My apartment stays mine. The relationship is strained but surviving. Some dreams are fantasies that die when you stop funding them. Edit. Thank you for all the responses. For those asking, no, I don't think my parents are evil people. They're scared of aging into irrelevance and grasped at a fantasy that happened to require my sacrifice. The problem wasn't malice. It was the unconscious assumption that my assets were family property while theirs were protected. That double standard was the real betrayal, more than the request itself. Edit 2. Someone asked if I feel guilty. Sometimes. Usually at 2 a.m. when I can't sleep. Then I remember, they couldn't tell me what hotel management software they'd use, what their marketing strategy was, or what their projected occupancy rate would be. They wanted to learn on my dime. That's not partnership. That's subsidized education with my apartment as tuition. Edit 3. Yes, I'm still going to family dinners. Yes, it's awkward. Yes, they still make comments about my valuable location. No, I don't engage. Some boundaries need constant maintenance. This is one of them.